The silence in the Willowbrook Community Center was deafening. 37 pairs of eyes stared at me as I stood frozen in the doorway, clutching a plastic container of store-bought cookies while everyone else's homemade casseroles and elaborate desserts covered the buffet tables. My brother Richard's voice cut through the air like a blade. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Well, look who decided to show up. Our family disappointment graces us with her presence. The laughter that followed wasn't kind. It was the sort of cruel chuckling that happens when a group finds a common target, and I had been that target for as long as I could remember. Monica, Richard's wife, whispered something to her friend Isabel, and they both glanced at my thrift store dress with barely concealed smirks. Even my own mother, Patricia, shook her head in what I knew was embarrassment. "Natalie," she said, her voice carrying across the room, "you're 40 minutes late, again." I wanted to explain that my car had broken down 3 blocks away and I'd walked the rest of the distance in the October rain, but experience had taught me that explanations only made things worse with my family. Instead, I mumbled an apology and made my way to the back corner where my cousin Dylan sat alone, the only person in the room who ever bothered to save me a seat. "Ignore them," Dylan whispered as I settled beside him, but we both knew it was impossible. The Harper family reunion happened every year, and every year it felt like a tribunal where I was perpetually found guilty of the crime of not living up to expectations. My father Kevin stood at the front of the room, preparing to give his annual speech about family achievements. Richard had just been promoted to senior partner at his law firm. Monica had won some prestigious award for her interior design business. My younger sister Courtney had graduated medical school and was starting her residency at Portland General Hospital. Even my teenage nephew had made varsity football, and then there was me. 32 years old, working part-time at a local bookstore, living in a studio apartment above Mrs. Chen's bakery, driving a 15-year-old Honda that spent more time in the shop than on the road. The family failure. The black sheep. The cautionary tale they probably used to motivate their children. Now, Kevin continued, his chest puffed with pride, "I want to hear from each of you about your accomplishments this year. Richard, why don't you start?" One by one, they shared their successes. Promotions, awards, new houses, exotic vacations, children's achievements. The list went on and on, each announcement met with enthusiastic applause and congratulations. I sat in my corner, feeling smaller with each passing minute, wondering why I even bothered coming to these gatherings. Finally, Kevin's eyes found mine. The room fell silent again, but this time it was the quiet of anticipation, like people waiting to watch a car accident happen in slow motion. "Natalie," he said, and I could hear the resignation in his voice. "Anything to share with the family this year?" I felt my face burn with embarrassment. What could I possibly say? That I'd been Employee of the Month at Riverside Books. That I'd finally saved enough money to fix my car's air conditioning. That I'd started writing again, filling notebooks with stories that no one would ever read. "I'm still working at the bookstore," I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. The silence stretched on until Richard cleared his throat. "Still, Natalie, you've been there for 3 years. When are you going to find a real career? Some people are just content with mediocrity," Monica added, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Not everyone can be ambitious." The words hit me like physical blows. I felt tears threatening to spill over, and I knew that if I started crying it would only confirm everything they already believed about me. That I was weak. That I was a disappointment. That I would never amount to anything. "Maybe she'll surprise us all someday," Dylan said quietly, placing a protective hand on my shoulder. But even his kindness couldn't shield me from the condescending looks and barely suppressed laughter that rippled through the room. "Oh, Dylan," Patricia said with a sigh, always the optimist. "But at some point, we have to accept reality. Natalie has always been different from the rest of us. She's never shown any real drive or ambition. Some people are just meant to live simple lives." Simple lives. The phrase echoed in my head as I excused myself to the bathroom, needing a moment to collect myself before I completely fell apart in front of everyone. I locked the door and stared at my reflection in the harsh fluorescent lighting. My dark hair was still damp from the rain, my makeup had smudged, and my dress, the nicest thing I owned, looked cheap and ill-fitting compared to the designer outfits everyone else was wearing. But as I looked at myself in that mirror, something shifted inside me. Because they were wrong about so many things. They didn't know about the late-night phone calls that had been lighting up my phone for the past 5 years. They didn't know about the private jets and red carpet events and movie premieres. They didn't know about the friendship that had quietly become the most important relationship in my life. They didn't know about Zara. When I returned to the main room, the conversation had moved on to planning next year's reunion. Monica was already volunteering to coordinate, discussing venues and catering options with the enthusiasm of someone who genuinely enjoyed being in charge. I slipped back into my seat next to Dylan, who gave me a concerned look. "You okay?" he whispered. I nodded, but inside, I was making a decision. This would be the last time I let them make me feel small. The last time I sat in silence while they diminished everything about my life. Because what they didn't understand was that my life wasn't small at all. It was just private. As the evening wound down, family members began saying their goodbyes. The ritual was always the same: warm hugs and promises to stay in touch for everyone else, and awkward obligatory embraces for me. Richard patted my shoulder in a way that was probably meant to be supportive, but felt patronizing instead. "Take care of yourself, Nat," he said. "And maybe think about what we talked about. There are community college programs that could help you develop some real skills." Monica nodded enthusiastically. "I have a friend who works in human resources. She might be able to help you find something entry-level in an office somewhere. Nothing glamorous, but it would be a step up from retail." I thanked them politely, the way I always did, and made my way toward the exit. But as I reached the door, I heard Isabel talking to one of the other family friends. "It's really sad, isn't it?" she was saying, her voice low but not quite low enough. "Natalie used to be such a bright child. Remember how she was always writing those little stories? We all thought she might become something creative, maybe a writer or a teacher. But I guess some people just don't have what it takes to make it in the real world." "She's always been a dreamer," another voice replied. "Living in fantasy land instead of facing reality. At least she has that little job at the bookstore. It's not much, but it's something." I stood there for a moment, my hand on the door handle, listening to them dissect my life like I was some sort of failed experiment. The part that hurt the most was that there was genuine sadness in their voices. They weren't being deliberately cruel. They actually believed they were being compassionate about my tragic circumstances. If only they knew. The rain had stopped by the time I walked back to my car, which had miraculously started on the first try. As I drove through the quiet streets of Riverside, past the small shops and modest houses that made up my world, my phone buzzed with a text message. I waited until I was parked outside my apartment building before checking it. "Hey beautiful, just wrapped filming for the night. Miss you, when are you coming to visit? I have so much to tell you. Z." I smiled for the first time all evening. Zara Wilde, 3-time Academy Award winner, Hollywood's current Golden Girl, and the one person in the world who knew exactly who I really was beneath all the small-town disappointment my family saw when they looked at me. We'd been best friends since we were 7 years old, when her family had briefly lived in Riverside during a difficult period in her father's career. While everyone else had treated the new girl with suspicion or indifference, I'd been the one to invite her to sit with me at lunch on her first day of school. We'd bonded over our shared love of books and storytelling, spending countless hours in my bedroom, creating elaborate fantasy worlds, and acting out scenes from our favorite movies. When her family moved to Los Angeles 2 years later, we'd promised to stay in touch. And somehow, miraculously, we had. Through letters at first, then emails, then phone calls and video chats. I'd watched from afar as she'd gotten her first acting role in a local theater production, then landed her breakthrough part in an independent film that caught the attention of major studios. I'd been the first person she'd called when she got her first big studio contract, and I was still the first person she called when she needed to talk through a difficult script or decompress after a challenging day on set. But I'd never told my family about any of it, partly because I knew they wouldn't believe me. Who would believe that boring, unsuccessful Natalie Harper was best friends with one of the most famous actresses in the world? And partly because I treasured the privacy of our friendship. In a world where Zara's every move was scrutinized by paparazzi and entertainment reporters, our relationship was the one thing that remained purely hers. I climbed the narrow stairs to my apartment, past Mrs. Chen's bakery, with its comforting smell of fresh bread and cinnamon rolls. My studio was small but cozy, filled with bookshelves and comfortable furniture that I'd carefully chosen from thrift stores and estate sales. The walls were covered with framed prints and photographs, but there were no pictures of me and Zara together. Those were kept in a private album, safe from curious eyes. As I changed out of my dress and into comfortable pajamas, I thought about the evening's events. The dismissive comments, the pitying looks, the casual cruelty disguised as concern. For years I'd absorbed it all, convinced myself that maybe they were right. Maybe I was a disappointment. Maybe I should want more conventional success. But talking to Zara always reminded me that success came in many forms. She'd often told me that my friendship had kept her grounded through the chaos of sudden fame, that our late-night conversations were what made her feel human again after long days of being treated like a product or a commodity. She valued my honesty, my perspective, my refusal to treat her differently just because the rest of the world had decided she was special. "You're my reality check," she'd said during one of our recent calls. "Everyone else tells me what they think I want to hear. You tell me the truth, even when it's not what I want to hear. That's worth more than any award." I pulled out my phone and called her back, knowing she'd still be awake despite the late hour. She answered on the second ring, her voice warm and familiar.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
"Nat, I was hoping you'd call. How was the family thing?" I sank onto my couch and told her everything. About Richard's comments, about my mother's embarrassment, about the way they'd talked about me like I was some sort of charity case. Zara listened without interrupting, the way she always did, and I could practically hear her getting angrier on my behalf. "They don't deserve you," she said finally, her voice fierce with loyalty. "They have no idea who you really are, or what you've accomplished." "What have I accomplished?" I asked, genuinely curious. "They're not wrong, Zara. I work part-time in a bookstore. I live in a studio apartment. I drive a car that's older than some of my nephews. You've been the most consistent supportive presence in my life for 25 years, she said immediately. You've helped me through 3 breakups, 2 nervous breakdowns, and countless career crises. You've read every script I've ever been offered and given me honest feedback that's probably saved my career half a dozen times. You've kept me sane, in an industry that actively tries to drive people crazy." I smiled, feeling some of the evening's pain start to fade. "That doesn't exactly look impressive on a resume." "Screw resumes," Zara said with characteristic bluntness. "You know what I was thinking about during my last interview. The journalist asked me who I most admired, and I almost said you. I wanted to tell him about this brilliant, kind, incredibly loyal person I know, who has the courage to live life on her own terms, instead of chasing other people's definitions of success. You didn't, though." "No," I chickened out. "But maybe I shouldn't have." There was a pause, and I could hear the wheels turning in her head. "Nat, I have an idea. A possibly crazy idea, but hear me out." I should have known that when Zara Wilde said she had a possibly crazy idea, it was definitely going to be completely insane. But at that moment, sitting in my tiny apartment, with the taste of my family's disappointment still bitter in my mouth, I was ready to hear anything that might change the trajectory of my life. "What if," she said slowly, "we stopped hiding our friendship? What if the next time your family decides to have one of their little judgment sessions, they get a surprise they'll never forget?" My heart started beating faster. "Zara, we've talked about this. Your privacy, your career." "My choice," she interrupted firmly. "And I'm tired of watching people treat you like you're nothing when you're everything to me. I'm tired of hiding one of the most important relationships in my life, just because some publicist decided it was better for my image to seem mysteriously private about my personal life." I was quiet for a long moment, processing what she was suggesting. For 5 years, ever since she'd become truly famous, we'd been careful to keep our friendship completely separate from her public life. We never posted photos together on social media, never mentioned each other in interviews, never even met in public places where someone might recognize her and start asking questions. "The family reunion is next year," I said finally. "I know, I have it marked on my calendar." Of course she did. Zara had always remembered the things that mattered to me, even when they seemed insignificant. She knew about my family's annual gathering, about how much it hurt me, about how I spent weeks beforehand dreading it, and weeks afterward recovering from it. "You can't just show up to a family reunion in Riverside, Oregon," I said, but even as I spoke, I could feel a tiny spark of possibility igniting in my chest. People would lose their minds. There would be photographers, reporters, let them come, she said with the confidence of someone who'd been dealing with media attention for years. Maybe it's time the world knew that Zara Wilde's best friend is a brilliant bookstore employee from a small town who's worth more than all the Hollywood phonies put together. The idea was terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. I tried to imagine the look on Richard's face, the shock in Monica's eyes, the way my mother's mouth would fall open when Zara Wilde walked into the Willowbrook Community Center and announced that boring, unsuccessful Natalie Harper was her closest friend. They won't believe it at first, I said, thinking out loud. They'll think it's some sort of publicity stunt, or that you're being paid to pretend. Then we'll prove it to them, Zara said simply. I'll tell them stories about you that only a real friend would know. I'll show them the pictures we've taken together over the years. I'll make it clear that this isn't some celebrity charity case, this is a friendship between equals. Equals, the word hit me like a revelation. Despite the differences in our circumstances, despite the fact that she was famous and wealthy, while I was neither, Zara had always treated our friendship as a partnership between equals. She valued my opinion, trusted my judgment, and genuinely enjoyed my company, not because of what I could do for her career, but because of who I was as a person. What about your team? I asked, thinking of the managers and publicists and agents who carefully controlled every aspect of her public image. Won't they have something to say about this? Zara laughed, and I could hear the rebellious streak that had gotten her into trouble in her early acting days. Probably. But they work for me, not the other way around. And honestly, my team has been pushing me to be more authentic and relatable in my public persona. What's more authentic than introducing the world to my actual best friend? We talked for another hour, sketching out the possibilities and implications of what she was suggesting. It wouldn't just be about the family reunion. If we went public with our friendship, it would change everything. My quiet private life would be exposed to scrutiny. People would want to know everything about me, about how we met, about what our friendship was like behind closed doors. Are you sure you're ready for that? Zara asked, as our conversation began to wind down. Once we do this, there's no going back. Your life will never be completely private again. I thought about it seriously. The idea of paparazzi and entertainment reporters was daunting, but the alternative, continuing to live as the family disappointment, continuing to hide one of the most meaningful relationships in my life, suddenly seemed much worse. I'm tired of being invisible, I said finally. I'm tired of letting people think I'm less than I am, just because my life doesn't look like what they think success should look like. You were never invisible to me, Zara said softly. You've always been the most real person in my life. After we hung up, I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling and imagining how different my life might look a year from now. The family reunion was still 11 months away, but I knew that everything had changed in the course of that phone conversation. For the first time in my adult life, I was going to stop hiding who I really was. The next morning, I woke up feeling different. The events of the previous evening, Richard's condescending comments, Monica's pitying looks, my mother's embarrassment, felt less devastating in the light of day. They still hurt, but now they felt like temporary pain instead of permanent truth. I walked downstairs to Mrs. Chen's bakery, where I often grabbed coffee before my shift at the bookstore. Mrs. Chen was behind the counter as usual, her gray hair pulled back in a neat bun, flour dusting her apron. "Morning, Natalie," she said with a warm smile. "How was your family gathering?" Mrs. Chen was one of the few people in town who'd always been kind to me without any agenda or judgment. She'd rented me the apartment above her bakery for below market rate when I'd been desperate for housing, and she often sent me home with leftover pastries that would have been thrown away otherwise. "It was what it always is," I said with a shrug, accepting the coffee she handed me. "How was your evening?" "Quiet. I spent it reading that book you recommended." She gestured to a worn paperback on the counter beside the register. "You have excellent taste in stories." I smiled, feeling a small glow of recognition. At the bookstore, customers often asked for my recommendations, and they usually left satisfied with their purchases. I had a gift for matching people with books they'd love, for understanding what someone was looking for even when they couldn't articulate it themselves. It wasn't the kind of skill that impressed my family, but it mattered to the people I helped. Mrs. Chen, I said impulsively, what do you think makes someone successful? She paused in her wiping of the counter, considering the question seriously. Different things for different people, she said finally. For some it's money, or fame or recognition, but I think real success is about being useful to others, about making the world a little better just by being in it. Why do you ask? Just thinking about things differently lately. She nodded, as if that made perfect sense. Sometimes we need to change our perspective to see clearly what was always there. I carried her words with me as I walked to the bookstore, past the familiar shops and houses that made up downtown Riverside. It was a small world compared to Los Angeles or New York, but it wasn't an insignificant one. People lived real lives here, built families and businesses and communities that mattered to them. Why had I always let my family convince me that small meant unsuccessful? At the bookstore, my manager Tom greeted me with his usual enthusiasm. Perfect timing, he said, gesturing to a stack of boxes that had arrived that morning. The new shipment came in, and I was hoping you could handle the mystery section. You always know exactly how to organize it so customers can find what they're looking for. I spent the morning unpacking books and arranging them on shelves, work that I'd always found satisfying in a way I couldn't quite explain. There was something deeply pleasant about creating order, about making sure the right books found their way to the right readers. When customers came in looking for recommendations, I was in my element, drawing on years of reading and an intuitive understanding of what different people might enjoy. Around lunchtime, a woman I didn't recognize came into the store looking frustrated. She was well-dressed and clearly from out of town, probably visiting Riverside for business or family reasons. I'm looking for something for my teenage daughter, she said, approaching the counter where I was working. She used to love reading, but lately she says everything is boring. I don't know what might interest her. I asked a few questions about her daughter's previous favorites, her age, her other interests. Within a few minutes, I had a sense of what might work and led her to a display of young adult novels I'd carefully curated. Try this one, I said, pulling out a book with an intriguing cover. It's got the romance and adventure elements she used to like, but with a more sophisticated edge that might appeal to her now that she's older. And if she likes it, there are 2 more books in the series. The woman looked skeptical, but she bought the book along with a backup option I'd suggested. 2 weeks later, she returned with her daughter in tow. I don't know how you did it, she said, approaching me with a huge smile, but this was exactly what she needed. She finished it in 2 days and has already read the other books in the series. She's asking me to drive her here every weekend now to look for more recommendations. Her daughter, a shy 16-year-old with purple hair and an armful of books, nodded enthusiastically. Do you have anything else like this? But maybe with more fantasy elements. I spent 20 minutes with them, discussing books and authors and discovering what kinds of stories resonated with this particular reader. By the time they left, her mother had purchased 6 books and scheduled a return visit the following weekend. You're amazing at this, Tom said, watching the interaction from behind the register. I've been selling books for 15 years and I've never seen anyone connect with customers the way you do. Have you ever thought about applying to some of the larger bookstores in Portland, or maybe even getting into publishing? The suggestion caught me off guard. I'd been so focused on my family's definition of success that I'd never really considered other possibilities for my life. What if my gift for understanding books and readers could be turned into something bigger? What if there were opportunities I'd never even thought to pursue? That evening, I called Zara to tell her about my day. She listened with genuine interest as I described the mother and daughter, the satisfaction I'd felt in helping them find exactly what they needed. That's what I'm talking about, she said, when I finished. You have this incredible ability to understand what people need and help them find it. Do you know how rare that is? Do you know how many people in my industry would kill to have that kind of intuitive understanding of human nature? It's just books, I said, but even as I spoke, I knew it was more than that. It's not just books, it's connection, it's empathy. It's the ability to see people clearly and help them discover things about themselves they didn't even know they were looking for. Zara paused, and I could hear excitement building in her voice. Nat, what if that family reunion isn't just about proving your worth to your relatives? What if it's about you finally seeing your own value clearly for the first time? After we hung up, I sat in my apartment thinking about the year ahead. 11 months until the reunion. 11 months to figure out who I really was beneath all the layers of family disappointment and self-doubt. 11 months to prepare for the moment when everything would change. For the first time in my adult life, I was looking forward to seeing what came next. What they didn't know about me could fill libraries. What they couldn't see was that while they were building their conventional definitions of success, I had been quietly constructing something entirely different. The truth was that my friendship with Zara hadn't just survived her meteoric rise to fame, it had deepened and evolved in ways that would have shocked my family into complete silence. 3 weeks after the disastrous reunion, I received a package that changed everything. It arrived on a Tuesday morning when Mrs. Chen was restocking her display cases downstairs. The delivery required a signature, which was unusual for my small apartment. The return address showed only a post office box in Beverly Hills, but I recognized Zara's careful handwriting immediately. Inside the nondescript brown box was something that made my breath catch. A first edition copy of To Kill a Mockingbird, one of the books we'd bonded over during her brief time in Riverside when we were children. But this wasn't just any first edition. Tucked inside the front cover was a handwritten note from Harper Lee herself, thanking Zara for her beautiful interpretation of literature's power to change hearts and minds in her recent film adaptation of a classic novel. The accompanying letter from Zara was equally stunning. She'd written it on official letterhead from Constellation Pictures, the major studio where she had an exclusive producing deal. But it wasn't the letterhead that took my breath away, it was what she was offering. Nat, the letter began in her familiar scrawl, I've been thinking about our conversation, and I have a proposition that goes beyond just showing up at next year's reunion. What if we turned your gift for understanding stories and connecting with people into something bigger? What if we made your expertise visible in a way that even your family couldn't dismiss? She went on to explain that Constellation Pictures was launching a new initiative to adapt literary works for streaming platforms. They needed someone with genuine expertise in contemporary and classic literature, someone who could identify promising source material and help guide adaptation decisions. Someone who understood both the artistic merit of books and their potential appeal to different audiences. The position would be based in Los Angeles initially, she wrote, but there would be significant travel and flexibility for remote work. The salary alone would be more than your family makes in their prestigious careers combined. But more importantly, this is real work, Nat. Meaningful work that would utilize every single one of your talents. The letter continued with details that made my head spin. She'd already spoken to her producing partner about me, sharing examples of my insights about books and storytelling that had influenced some of her recent project choices. They wanted to meet with me, to discuss the possibility of bringing me on as a literary consultant with potential for advancement into producing roles. I should have done this years ago, the letter concluded. I should have found a way to make your brilliance visible to the world instead of keeping it all to myself. You've been my secret weapon for so long that I forgot other people deserve to benefit from your expertise too. I read the letter 3 times before the full implications sank in. This wasn't charity or friendship doing me a favor, this was a legitimate career opportunity based on skills I hadn't even realized I possessed. For years I'd helped Zara analyze scripts and source material without thinking of it as professional consultation. Our late-night conversations about character development and narrative structure had felt like friendly discussions, not the kind of expertise that major studios paid handsomely to access. But as I thought back over our friendship, I began to see patterns I'd missed. The projects Zara had chosen, the roles she'd accepted or turned down, the scripts she'd championed for production, so many of those decisions had been influenced by our conversations. I'd helped her navigate an industry I'd never worked in, using intuition and analytical skills I'd developed through years of reading and recommending books to customers who trusted my judgment. The phone rang while I was still processing the letter. Zara's name appeared on the screen, and I answered with hands that were actually trembling. "Did you get my package?" she asked without preamble. "Zara, I can't accept this. It's too much. You can't just create a job for me because my family thinks I'm a failure." "I'm not creating anything," she said firmly. "This position exists because the studio recognizes a need for someone with your specific expertise. I'm just making sure they meet the right person to fill it. And honestly, Nat, you've been doing this work for free for 5 years. It's about time someone paid you what you're worth." Over the next hour, she walked me through the details of what the job would actually entail. Reading manuscripts and galleys, identifying potential adaptation projects, working with writers and directors to maintain the integrity of source material while making necessary changes for visual media. It was exactly the kind of work that played to my strengths, understanding stories, recognizing what made them compelling, and communicating that understanding to others. "What about Riverside?" I asked. What about the bookstore, Mrs. Chen, my apartment? What about them? Zara responded gently. You can visit whenever you want. You can maintain those relationships, but Nat, you're 32 years old. When are you going to stop hiding your light under a bushel just because your family convinced you it wasn't bright enough? The conversation lasted until well past midnight, covering everything from practical logistics to deeper questions about what I wanted my life to look like. By the time we hung up, I had agreed to fly to Los Angeles the following week for meetings with Zara's producing partners and studio executives. The next few days passed in a blur of research and preparation. I'd never been to Los Angeles, never been in a business meeting with entertainment industry professionals, never even owned the kind of clothing that would be appropriate for such meetings. But for the first time in years, instead of feeling overwhelmed by my inadequacy, I felt excited by the challenge. Dylan was the only family member I told about the upcoming trip, and even with him, I kept the details vague. I simply said I was visiting a friend and might have some work opportunities to explore. He seemed genuinely happy for me, which was more support than I usually received from anyone in my family. You know, he said, as we shared coffee at Riverside's only decent cafe, you've seemed different lately. More confident or something. Like you're finally seeing something the rest of us have been seeing all along. His words stayed with me as I prepared for the trip. What if the problem wasn't that I lacked value or potential, but that I'd been so focused on my family's narrow definition of success, that I'd failed to recognize my own strengths? What if there were opportunities and possibilities I'd never even considered because I'd been too busy feeling inadequate to look beyond the small world where I'd been categorized as a disappointment? The flight to Los Angeles was my first time on an airplane, which seemed absurd for someone my age, but was simply another reflection of how limited my experiences had been. Zara met me at LAX, and seeing her in person after months of phone calls felt like stepping into a different version of reality. She looked exactly like herself, of course, but somehow more vivid than she appeared in magazines or on movie screens. People recognized her immediately, but she moved through the airport with practiced ease, signing autographs and taking photos with fans while keeping our conversation going seamlessly. Is it always like this? I asked as we settled into her car, a understated but expensive sedan that probably cost more than I'd made in the past 2 years. Pretty much, she said with a shrug. You get used to it. Although I have to warn you, if we go public with our friendship, you'll need to get used to it too. Are you prepared for that? I wasn't sure anyone could be prepared for that level of attention, but I was beginning to understand that staying hidden wasn't protecting me, it was diminishing me. I think I'm ready to find out, I said. Her house in the Hollywood Hills was stunning, but not ostentatious, decorated with the kind of tasteful elegance that spoke of someone who had money but didn't need to prove it. What struck me most was how normal it felt once we were inside. We ordered takeout Chinese food and sat on her couch talking about books and movies and mutual friends, just like we'd done hundreds of times over video calls. I'm nervous about tomorrow, I admitted as we shared lo mein and noodles from cardboard containers. Don't be, she said. These people need what you have to offer, you just need to let them see it. The meetings the next day exceeded my wildest expectations. Constellation Pictures occupied an entire building in Century City, with offices that looked like sets from movies about the entertainment industry. But once I got past the intimidating surroundings, the actual conversations felt surprisingly natural. Marcus Webb, Zara's producing partner, was a soft-spoken man in his 50s who had built his career on identifying promising source material for adaptation. He asked me to walk through my thought process for analyzing potential projects, using examples from books I'd recommended to customers over the years. What made you suggest The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo's to a 60-year-old grandmother, who usually only read cozy mysteries? He asked, referencing a story I'd shared.
Yep.
She was going through a divorce after 30 years of marriage, I explained. She needed to see that women could reinvent themselves at any age, that there were stories about complex female characters who refused to be defined by other people's expectations. The glamour and romance were just the delivery system for a deeper message about self-determination. Marcus and his assistant exchanged glances. And she liked it, she loved it. She went on to read everything Taylor Jenkins Reid had written, and then branched out into other contemporary women's fiction. 6 months later, she was leading a book club and had completely transformed her social life. That's exactly what we need, said Sarah Chen, the studio executive who was spearheading the literary adaptation initiative. Someone who understands not just what makes a good story, but what makes a story relevant to specific audiences. Someone who can bridge the gap between literary merit and commercial appeal. The formal interview process took most of the day, but it didn't feel like an interview. It felt like a series of conversations with people who were genuinely interested in my perspectives and insights. They asked me to analyze several books they were considering for adaptation, to explain what elements would translate well to visual media, and what challenges might arise in the adaptation process. By the end of the day, they'd offered me the position with a salary that was 3 times what I'd been making at the bookstore, plus benefits and opportunities for advancement that seemed almost too good to be true. But more importantly, they'd made it clear that they valued my expertise for its own sake, not just because of my connection to Zara. I need to think about it, I said, though every instinct was screaming at me to accept immediately. Of course, Sarah said. Take whatever time you need. But I hope you'll seriously consider this, Natalie. We've been looking for someone with your particular combination of skills for months. Zara didn't create this opportunity, she just helped us find the right person to fill it. That evening Zara and I celebrated at a restaurant in West Hollywood where the waitstaff treated her like royalty but somehow made me feel equally welcome. Over dinner we talked about what accepting the position would mean, not just professionally but personally. I keep waiting for someone to tell me this is all a mistake, I confessed over dessert. That they've confused me with someone who actually knows what they're doing. Imposter syndrome, Zara said knowingly. I felt the same way when I got my first big break. But here's the thing, Nat, you do know what you're doing. You've been doing it for years, just not in a context that your family recognized as valuable. She was right, of course. All those hours spent helping customers find books they'd love, all those conversations with Zara, about scripts and characters and story structure, all those years of reading and analyzing and developing my understanding of what made narratives compelling. It had all been preparation for this moment, even though I hadn't realized it at the time. What about my family? I asked. They're going to think I've lost my mind, leaving everything familiar to chase some Hollywood dream. Zara smiled, and there was something almost predatory in her expression. Let them think that. They'll understand soon enough. I spent 2 more days in Los Angeles, touring the studio facilities and meeting with other team members I'd be working with. Everyone I encountered was professional and welcoming, and several people mentioned that they were excited to work with someone who brought a fresh perspective to their projects. On my last night in the city, Zara and I stayed up late talking about the future. She'd been invited to present at the Golden Globes the following January, just a few weeks before my family's reunion. The timing, she pointed out, was perfect. Here's what I'm thinking, she said, her eyes bright with mischief. You accept the job, you move to Los Angeles, you spend the next few months establishing yourself as a legitimate professional in the entertainment industry. And then when your family gathers for their annual judgment session, I make a very public announcement about my brilliant best friend, who's revolutionizing how literary properties get adapted for film and television. The plan was audacious and appealing and terrifying all at once. But as I sat in her living room, looking out at the lights of a city that might become my new home, I realized that I was tired of being small, tired of hiding, tired of letting other people's limited vision define what was possible for my life. I'll do it, I said, and the words felt like jumping off a cliff and growing wings at the same time. The flight back to Riverside gave me 6 hours to process what I'd just committed to doing. By the time I landed in Oregon, I had mentally rehearsed the conversations I'd need to have with Tom at the bookstore, with Mrs. Chen about my apartment, with my family about my sudden departure for California. Mrs. Chen, as I'd expected, was nothing but supportive when I explained that I'd been offered a career opportunity that required relocating to Los Angeles. I always knew you were meant for bigger things, she said, refusing to accept my offer to pay an extra month's rent as compensation for short notice. You've brought so much joy to the people in this neighborhood, it's time for you to share that gift with a wider world. Tom at the bookstore was equally gracious, though clearly disappointed to lose me. You're irreplaceable, he said simply. But I understand why you have to go. Just promise me you'll come back and visit sometimes. Dylan was the only family member I told about my plans before leaving, and his reaction was everything I could have hoped for. I'm proud of you, he said, when I finished explaining about the job offer and the move, and I'm not surprised. You've always been too smart and too talented for this place. I just wish it hadn't taken you so long to see it yourself. Will you tell the others after I'm gone? I asked. He nodded. I'll let them know you've accepted a professional opportunity in Los Angeles. I won't give them details they don't deserve to have. 2 weeks later, I was packing my life into boxes and preparing to drive across the country to a new existence I couldn't have imagined a month earlier. As I loaded my car with my books and few possessions, I felt a mixture of terror and exhilaration that reminded me of being a child on the highest diving board at the community pool. The drive to Los Angeles took 3 days, with stops in cities I'd never seen, and landscapes that gradually shifted from the familiar green of Oregon to the desert beauty of California. With each mile, I felt myself becoming someone new, or perhaps becoming who I'd always been underneath the layers of family disappointment and self-doubt. Zara had helped me find a small apartment in West Hollywood, close enough to the studio for an easy commute but far enough from her own neighborhood to maintain our privacy until we were ready to go public. Moving in felt like the first adult decision I'd ever made entirely for myself, without considering what anyone else would think or want. My first day at Constellation Pictures was simultaneously overwhelming and perfectly natural. The work itself, reading manuscripts, analyzing narrative structure, identifying adaptation challenges and opportunities, felt like an extension of conversations I'd been having with customers and with Zara for years. But doing it in a professional context, with a team of colleagues who valued my input and a salary that reflected my worth, transformed those familiar skills into something powerful and legitimate. Within a month, I'd identified 3 novels that the studio optioned for development. Within 2 months, I was being consulted on adaptation decisions for major projects. Within 3 months, Marcus was telling anyone who would listen that hiring me had been one of the best decisions the studio had made all year. You have an instinct for this that can't be taught, he told me during my first quarterly review. You see possibilities that other people miss, and you understand audiences in a way that comes from genuine empathy rather than market research. The compliment meant more to me than any praise I'd ever received, partly because it came from someone who had no reason to flatter me, but mostly because it helped me see myself clearly for the first time. I wasn't successful because Zara had helped me get a job. I was successful because I'd finally found work that matched my natural abilities. As the months passed, and my confidence grew, I began to understand that my family's dismissal of my life in Riverside hadn't been accurate. They'd been wrong about my potential, wrong about my intelligence, and wrong about what success could look like. But more importantly, I'd been wrong too. I'd accepted their assessment of my worth instead of developing my own sense of what was valuable and meaningful. By December, as the Golden Globes approached and our plan for the family reunion began to take concrete shape, I was no longer the same person who had stood in the doorway of the Willowbrook Community Center clutching store-bought cookies and absorbing cruel laughter. I was someone who belonged in boardrooms and on film sets, someone whose opinion was sought and valued, someone who had finally learned to see herself the way her true friends had always seen her. The woman who had been dismissed as the family disappointment was about to become impossible to ignore. And I was ready. The Golden Globes ceremony was scheduled for January 15th, just 3 weeks before my family's annual reunion. Zara had been nominated for Best Supporting Actress for her role in Midnight in Morocco, a film that had garnered critical acclaim and commercial success in equal measure. What my family didn't know was that I had been instrumental in helping her choose that role, analyzing the script and discussing the character's motivations during countless late-night phone calls. The plan we'd developed was elegant in its simplicity. Zara would attend the Golden Globes as usual, but this year she would mention me in her acceptance speech if she won, or during her presenting segment if she didn't. She would refer to me as her closest friend and creative collaborator, thanking me for years of support and guidance. The entertainment media would immediately want to know who this mysterious friend was, and within hours, my name and background would be public knowledge. By the time my family gathered in Riverside for their annual judgment session, everyone in America would know that their black sheep loser was actually the best friend and creative advisor to one of Hollywood's most successful actresses. The irony was delicious, but it was also deeply personal. This wasn't just about shocking my relatives, it was about finally claiming my place in the world without apology or explanation. 3 days before the Golden Globes, I received an unexpected phone call from Dylan. His voice was tense in a way I'd never heard before, and my first thought was that someone in the family had discovered my new life in Los Angeles. "Nat," he said without preamble, "I need to tell you something, and you're not going to like it." My heart began racing. "What happened?" "Richard has been calling around, asking questions about where you went and what you're doing." Apparently, Monica has friends in Portland who work in entertainment, and they've been trying to find out if you're really working for a studio, or if you're just delusional about some imaginary job. The nerve of it stunned me into momentary silence. Even from a distance, even when they thought I was safely out of their lives, my family couldn't resist the urge to investigate and diminish my choices. What did you tell them? I asked. Nothing specific. I said you were working in the entertainment industry and seemed happy, but I didn't give details. But Nat, they're planning something for the reunion. Richard has been making comments about needing to stage an intervention for your Hollywood fantasies. They think you've had some kind of breakdown and are living in denial about your real circumstances. I felt a familiar anger rising in my chest, but this time it was different. Instead of the helpless frustration I'd experienced for years, this was righteous fury backed by concrete evidence of my worth and accomplishments. They wanted to stage an intervention? Perfect. Let them try. Dylan, I said carefully, what if I told you that everything is about to change? That by the time the reunion happens, Richard and Monica and all the rest of them are going to understand exactly how wrong they've been about me. What do you mean? I couldn't tell him about Zara, not yet. The timing had to be perfect, and I couldn't risk word getting back to the family before the Golden Globes. But I could give him a hint of what was coming. Just trust me, I said, and maybe suggest to the family that they watch the Golden Globes this year. Tell them it might be educational. After I hung up, I called Zara immediately. She was in the middle of final preparations for the ceremony, dress fittings and interviews and all the elaborate choreography that surrounded major award shows, but she made time to talk through our strategy one more time. Are you having second thoughts? She asked, probably hearing something in my voice that betrayed my nerves. No, I said firmly. If anything, I'm more determined than ever. Dylan just told me that Richard is planning to stage an intervention at the reunion because he thinks I'm delusional about working in entertainment. They literally cannot conceive of a world where I might actually be successful. Zara's laugh was sharp and dangerous. Oh, this is going to be so much better than I originally planned. Nat, what if we don't wait for the reunion? What if we give them a preview of what's coming? She explained her revised idea as I listened with growing excitement and terror. Instead of simply mentioning me during the Golden Globes broadcast, she would invite me as her date to the ceremony. We would walk the red carpet together, and she would introduce me to entertainment reporters as her best friend and creative collaborator. The story would explode across social media and entertainment news before the ceremony even began. It's more exposure than we originally planned, she warned. Once we do this, there's absolutely no going back to privacy. Are you ready for that level of public attention? I thought about Richard's planned intervention, about Monica's investigation into my delusional claims, about years of being treated like a cautionary tale at family gatherings. I'm ready, I said. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of preparation that felt like getting ready for battle. Zara arranged for a stylist to work with me, selecting a gown that was elegant without being flashy, sophisticated enough for a major red carpet but not so elaborate that it would upstage her own outfit. The stylist, a sharp-eyed woman named Carmen, seemed to understand exactly what we were trying to achieve. You want to look successful but not like you're trying too hard, she said, as we reviewed options. You want to look like someone who belongs in this world, someone who's comfortable with attention but doesn't need it to feel important. The dress we selected was a deep navy blue that complemented my coloring perfectly, with clean lines that suggested professionalism and confidence. The shoes were higher than anything I'd ever worn, but Carmen assured me that I'd get used to them with practice. The jewelry was simple but expensive, pieces that would photograph well under the bright lights of the red carpet. Remember, Carmen said as we finished the final fitting, you're not playing a role tonight, you're just being yourself in fancy clothes. These people are going to want to know who you are and why Zara values your friendship so much. Just tell them the truth. The truth. It seemed both simple and impossibly complex. The truth was that I was a small-town bookstore employee who had stumbled into a career in entertainment through talent and friendship and sheer determination to prove my worth. The truth was that I'd spent 32 years believing I was inadequate because other people had convinced me that my strengths didn't matter. The truth was that I was terrified and exhilarated and ready to claim a life that finally matched who I really was. On the morning of the Golden Globes, I woke up in my West Hollywood apartment feeling like I was about to jump out of an airplane. Zara called early to check on me, her own excitement obvious despite her experience with major public events. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "Like I might throw up," I admitted. But also like I've been waiting my whole life for this moment. That's exactly right, she said. Tonight everyone is going to see what I've always seen when I look at you. They're going to see someone brilliant and accomplished and worthy of respect. The car service arrived at 4 o'clock to take us to the Beverly Hilton where the ceremony was being held. Zara had decided that we should arrive together rather than meeting at the venue, partly for logistical reasons but mostly because she wanted to be with me for moral support during those crucial first moments on the red carpet. When she emerged from her house in a stunning silver gown that seemed to have been designed specifically to complement my navy dress, I felt a surge of gratitude so intense it almost overwhelmed me. This incredible, successful, famous woman was willing to share the spotlight of one of the biggest nights of her career just to help me claim the recognition I deserved. "You look perfect," she said, embracing me carefully to avoid disturbing our hair and makeup. "Are you ready to show the world who Natalie Harper really is?" The drive to the Beverly Hilton took 45 minutes through Los Angeles traffic, giving us time to review our strategy one final time. Zara would introduce me to reporters as her best friend and creative collaborator, explaining that I'd been instrumental in helping her choose roles and develop characters for years. If asked about my background, I would mention my work at Constellation Pictures and my expertise in literary adaptation, but I wouldn't volunteer information about my family or my life in Riverside unless specifically asked. The key, Zara reminded me, is to be confident but not defensive. You don't owe anyone explanations for your past choices or your family's opinions. You're here because you've earned your place here. As our car approached the red carpet area, I could see the crowds of photographers and reporters lined up behind barriers, their cameras and microphones ready to capture every moment of the evening's arrivals. The noise was incredible, shouting voices calling out questions and directions, the rapid-fire clicking of camera shutters, the general chaos of a major media event. "Last chance to change your mind," Zara said, but she was smiling as she said it. "Not a chance," I replied, and I meant it. The car door opened, and suddenly we were stepping onto the red carpet under lights so bright they felt like physical heat. Zara moved with practiced grace, posing for photographers and waving to fans, but she kept one hand on my arm to guide me through the chaos. Within seconds, reporters were shouting questions about who I was and why I was there. "This is my best friend Natalie Harper," Zara announced to the first reporter who approached us, a woman from Entertainment Tonight whose face I recognized from television. "She's a literary consultant at Constellation Pictures and one of the most brilliant people I know. She's been my closest advisor and creative collaborator for years." The reporter's eyes lit up with interest. "Natalie, how long have you and Zara been friends?" 25 years, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "We met when we were children, and we've maintained our friendship through all the changes in both our lives." "And you work in entertainment as well?" "I'm a literary consultant specializing in adaptation projects. I help studios identify promising source material and guide the development process to maintain the integrity of the original work while making necessary changes for visual media." More reporters gathered around us, drawn by the novelty of Zara bringing an unknown friend to such a high-profile event. Within minutes, I was fielding questions about my background, my work, and my relationship with one of Hollywood's most successful actresses. Zara stayed beside me throughout the interview process, occasionally adding details or redirecting questions when they became too personal. "Natalie has been instrumental in several of my recent project choices," she told a reporter from Variety. "Her insights into character development and narrative structure have influenced some of the most important decisions of my career. She's not just my friend, she's my creative partner." The interviews continued for nearly an hour as we made our way down the red carpet. By the time we reached the entrance to the Beverly Hilton, I felt like I'd been through basic training for celebrity life. The constant attention was exhausting but also exhilarating. For the first time in my adult life, people were interested in my opinions, my expertise, my perspective on things that mattered. Inside the hotel ballroom, the atmosphere was more relaxed but no less impressive. Tables filled with entertainment industry luminaries stretched across a space decorated with elaborate floral arrangements and dramatic lighting. Zara introduced me to other actors, directors, and producers, and each introduction reinforced my growing sense that I belonged in this world. "This is my friend Natalie Harper," she would say. "She's revolutionizing how studios approach literary adaptations." The conversations that followed were substantive and engaging. People wanted to know about my work, my methods for evaluating source material, my thoughts on recent adaptations that had succeeded or failed. I found myself discussing narrative theory with Academy Award-winning directors and debating character development with actors whose work I'd admired for years. Marcus Webb found me during the cocktail hour before the ceremony began. "Natalie," he said with obvious pride, "I've been watching you work the room tonight, and I have to say, you're a natural at this. Several people have already asked me about collaborating with our literary department because of conversations they've had with you." During the ceremony itself, I sat at Zara's table with other nominees and industry professionals, feeling simultaneously like an imposter and like someone who had finally found her tribe. When Zara's category was announced, I held my breath along with everyone else at our table. And the Golden Globe for Best Supporting Actress goes to Zara Wilde for Midnight in Morocco. The explosion of applause was deafening as Zara rose from her seat, embraced me quickly, and made her way to the stage. Standing at the podium with her award in hand, she looked directly at our table before beginning her speech. "This role challenged me in ways I never expected," she began, "and I couldn't have brought this character to life without the support and guidance of the people who matter most to me. I want to thank my friend and creative collaborator Natalie Harper, who helped me understand this character's complexity and find the emotional truth at the heart of her story." The camera found me in the audience as applause filled the ballroom, and I felt a moment of pure surreal disbelief. Millions of people around the world were watching Zara Wilde thank me by name at the Golden Globes. In 3 weeks, my family would be gathering for their annual reunion, and by then they would all know exactly who I had become. After the ceremony ended, the real work began. Entertainment reporters wanted follow-up interviews, industry professionals exchanged contact information with me, and photographers captured dozens of images of Zara and me together at various after-parties. By the time we finally returned to her house in the early hours of the morning, my phone was buzzing constantly with notifications from social media and text messages from people I hadn't heard from in years. "Check this out," Zara said, scrolling through her phone as we sat in her living room, still wearing our gowns but with our shoes kicked off. "You're trending on Twitter. Natalie Harper Zara Wilde best friend is the #3 trending topic in the United States." I looked at my own phone and felt a jolt of shock. The notifications were overwhelming: friend requests on social media, messages from former college classmates, emails from industry professionals who wanted to discuss potential collaborations. But mixed in with all the professional and social responses were texts from family members who had clearly seen the broadcast. Dylan had sent a simple message: "Holy shit, Nat, you did it." But there were others that made my stomach clench with familiar dread. Richard had texted, "We need to talk. This publicity stunt has gone too far." Monica had sent, "Whatever game you're playing, it needs to stop before you embarrass the family further." Even my mother had weighed in: "Natalie, please call me immediately. We're very concerned about what you've gotten yourself involved in." "They still don't get it," I said, showing Zara the messages. "They think this is some kind of elaborate deception or publicity stunt. They literally cannot accept that I might actually be successful." Zara read through the messages with growing indignation. "3 weeks," she said finally. "In 3 weeks, they'll be sitting in that community center preparing to stage their little intervention, and instead they're going to get the shock of their lives." She was right. Tonight had been the opening move in a game that would culminate at the family reunion. By then the entertainment media would have thoroughly documented my friendship with Zara and my professional accomplishments. My success would be undeniable, public, and completely impossible for my family to dismiss or diminish. The next few days confirmed that our strategy had worked beyond our wildest expectations. Entertainment Weekly ran a feature story about our friendship, complete with photos from the Golden Globes and quotes from industry professionals who praised my work at Constellation Pictures. Variety published an interview with me about literary adaptation, treating me as a legitimate expert in the field. People magazine included us in their Best Friends of the Stars feature, with a photo spread that showed us both in professional settings and casual moments. The attention was intense and sometimes overwhelming, but it was also validating in ways I hadn't expected. For the first time in my life, I was being recognized for my intelligence, my expertise, and my professional accomplishment. The shy bookstore employee who had been dismissed as a family disappointment was being celebrated as a creative professional, whose insights were valued by some of the most successful people in entertainment. But perhaps the most satisfying response came from Tom at the Riverside bookstore, who called me 3 days after the Golden Globes broadcast. Nat, he said, his voice warm with genuine pride, I just wanted you to know that we've had a steady stream of customers coming in asking about you. Apparently everyone in town saw the award show, and now they're all talking about how you used to work here. I've been telling everyone who'll listen that I always knew you were special. Mrs. Chen sent a care package filled with my favorite pastries and a note that simply said, always proud of you. Come visit soon. Even some of my regular customers from the bookstore reached out through social media, expressing excitement about my success and sharing memories of our conversations about books and stories. It was a reminder that my life in Riverside hadn't been meaningless or unsuccessful. It had just been undervalued by people who couldn't see beyond their own narrow definitions of achievement. As the reunion date approached, I found myself feeling less nervous and more curious about how my family would react when confronted with undeniable evidence of my success. The intervention Richard had planned would be impossible to carry out when the person you're trying to help has just been featured in major entertainment publications and thanked by name during a nationally televised awards ceremony. 2 days before I was scheduled to fly back to Oregon for the reunion, Zara made a suggestion that took our plan to an entirely new level. What if I came with you? She asked during one of our regular evening conversations. What if I showed up at the reunion as your guest? The idea was breathtaking in its audacity. Zara Wilde appearing at a Harper family reunion in Riverside, Oregon, would be like a bomb going off in the middle of their carefully ordered world. You can't be serious, I said. The media attention alone would be insane. And my family would probably spontaneously combust. Exactly, she said, with obvious relish. They want to stage an intervention because they think you're delusional about your Hollywood connections. Let's give them a reality check they'll never forget. As we discussed the logistics and implications, I realized that this final gesture would complete my transformation from family disappointment to someone who commanded respect and recognition. Walking into that community center with Zara Wilde at my side would be the ultimate vindication of every choice I'd made and every risk I'd taken. All right, I said. Finally, let's finish what we started. The morning of the reunion arrived with the kind of crisp February weather that made Oregon beautiful and intimidating in equal measure. I stood in the bathroom of my hotel room in downtown Riverside, applying makeup with hands that trembled slightly despite my determination to remain calm. The woman looking back at me from the mirror bore little resemblance to the person who had fled this same town 8 months earlier, with a broken-down Honda and a heart full of doubt. My outfit had been carefully chosen with Carmen's help during a video consultation the week before. A sophisticated charcoal gray dress that suggested success without ostentation, paired with heels that added just enough height to make me feel powerful. The jewelry was understated but expensive, pieces that would photograph well if the media attention followed us to Riverside, which seemed increasingly likely given the buzz surrounding Zara's unexpected decision to attend a small-town family gathering. The entertainment press had caught wind of our plans 3 days earlier, when Zara's security team had quietly begun making arrangements for her visit to Oregon. By yesterday morning, Variety was running speculation pieces about what would bring Hollywood's golden girl to a community center in Riverside, and social media was exploding with theories ranging from a secret film project to an elaborate publicity stunt. My phone had been ringing constantly with calls from entertainment reporters who wanted quotes about Zara's upcoming appearance at my family reunion. I declined all interviews, following the media strategy Zara's publicist had developed to maximize the impact of our revelation. The less information available beforehand, the more dramatic the moment would be when we walked into that community center together. At 11 o'clock, exactly 1 hour before the reunion was scheduled to begin, I heard the unmistakable sound of helicopter rotors approaching the hotel. I looked out my window to see a sleek aircraft settling onto the landing pad of the medical center across the street, drawing dozens of curious onlookers who had clearly never seen anything like it in Riverside. 10 minutes later, Zara knocked on my hotel room door, looking absolutely radiant in a casual but expensive ensemble that managed to be both approachable and unmistakably glamorous. Her security team remained discreetly in the hallway while she entered my room, closing the door behind her with obvious relief. "This town is adorable," she said, embracing me warmly. "I can absolutely see why you treasure your time here. Although I think we've caused quite a stir already." She gestured toward the window, where we could see people gathering on the street below, some clearly hoping to catch a glimpse of the famous actress, who had unexpectedly descended upon their quiet community. Local news crews had arrived as well, setting up cameras and interviewing anyone willing to share their thoughts about Zara Wilde's mysterious visit to Riverside. Are you having second thoughts? I asked, studying her face for any signs of doubt or regret. Absolutely not, she replied firmly. I've been looking forward to this moment for months. Your family has underestimated you for the last time, and I can't wait to see their faces when they realize exactly who you've become. We spent the next 30 minutes reviewing our strategy one final time, while Zara's hair and makeup team made subtle adjustments to ensure she looked perfect for the inevitable photographs. The plan was elegantly simple. We would arrive at the community center together, make our entrance during the social hour, when everyone would be gathered in the main room, and let the chips fall where they may. Remember, Zara said, as we prepared to leave the hotel, you don't owe them explanations or apologies. You're not the same person who left here 8 months ago feeling like a failure. You're a successful professional with a thriving career and friendships that span industries. Act like it. The drive to the Willowbrook Community Center took less than 10 minutes, but the scene that greeted us when we arrived was unlike anything I could have imagined. Word of Zara's presence in town had spread with the speed that only small communities can achieve. And the parking lot was filled not just with cars belonging to Harper family members, but with vehicles from local news stations, curious townspeople, and what appeared to be fans who had driven from Portland and Seattle, hoping to catch a glimpse of a major celebrity. Oh my, Zara said, surveying the chaos with obvious amusement. I think we might have underestimated how big this was going to be. Her security team, led by a competent woman named Sarah Martinez, quickly assessed the situation and developed a plan for getting us safely from the car to the building entrance. They formed a protective barrier around us as we emerged from the vehicle, but not before every camera in the parking lot had captured images of Zara Wilde and me walking together toward the entrance of the Willowbrook Community Center. The noise was incredible. Reporters shouting questions, fans calling out Zara's name, the general buzz of excitement that surrounded any appearance by a major celebrity. But through it all, I could see members of my extended family standing at the windows of the community center, their faces frozen in expressions of shock and disbelief that were almost comical. Richard stood near the main entrance, his mouth literally hanging open as he watched us approach. Monica was beside him, clutching his arm with white knuckles, her carefully styled hair already showing signs of stress-induced dishevelment. Behind them, I could see other family members pressed against the windows, their voices audible even through the glass, as they tried to process what they were witnessing. Is that really Natalie? I heard my cousin Beth ask in a voice loud enough to carry across the parking lot. It can't be, Monica replied, but her conviction was wavering as we drew closer. This has to be some kind of mistake. The moment we stepped through the entrance to the community center, the room fell into a silence so complete that it felt almost supernatural. 37 family members and their guests stood frozen in tableau, holding plates of food and glasses of punch, while they stared at the impossible sight of their designated family failure walking arm in arm with one of the most famous actresses in the world. Zara handled the moment with perfect grace, her smile warm and genuine, as she surveyed the room full of stunned relatives. She had insisted on wearing a simple but elegant outfit that would photograph well while still being appropriate for a family gathering, and the overall effect was of someone who belonged anywhere she chose to be. Hello everyone, I said, my voice carrying clearly in the absolute silence. I'd like you all to meet my best friend Zara Wilde. The reaction was immediate and chaotic. Several people dropped their plates. Someone gasped so loudly that it echoed off the walls. Richard actually took a step backward, as if Zara's presence might be physically dangerous. And in the corner of the room, I saw my father Kevin reaching for a chair, apparently needing to sit down before he fell down. Zara stepped forward with the confidence of someone accustomed to managing awkward social situations. It's wonderful to finally meet Natalie's family, she said, her voice warm and sincere. She's told me so much about all of you over the years. Dylan was the first to recover his composure, crossing the room with a huge grin on his face. Zara Wilde, he said, extending his hand. I'm Dylan, Natalie's cousin. This is absolutely incredible. Dylan, Zara replied, shaking his hand enthusiastically. Natalie has mentioned you so many times. You're the one who's always supported her dreams, right? She speaks of you with such affection. The ice broken by Dylan's warmth, other family members began to approach tentatively, though their expressions remained shell-shocked. My Aunt Linda asked for a selfie, which Zara graciously agreed to take. My cousin Beth stammered through an introduction, while trying to subtly text someone on her phone. Even some of the older family members, who I would have sworn had never heard of Zara Wilde, seemed to recognize that they were in the presence of genuine celebrity. But throughout the initial flurry of introductions and photo requests, I noticed that the core group of my most critical relatives remained frozen in place. Richard, Monica, and my mother Patricia stood clustered near the buffet table, their faces cycling through expressions of confusion, denial, and slowly dawning horror as the implications of what they were witnessing began to sink in. Finally, Richard approached us, his lawyer's training allowing him to maintain a facade of professional composure, despite the obvious turmoil beneath the surface. "Miss Wilde," he said, offering a stiff handshake. "I'm Richard Harper, Natalie's brother. This is certainly unexpected. Please call me Zara," she replied warmly. And yes, I suppose it must be surprising. Natalie told me that her family wasn't entirely aware of the extent of our friendship. We've kept it private for so many years, to protect both our personal lives and my career. Monica stepped forward, her media-trained social instincts apparently overriding her shock. "Zara, it's such an honor to meet you. I have to say, we had no idea that you two were best friends for 25 years, Zara supplied helpfully. "She's been my closest confidant and creative collaborator through my entire career. I honestly don't know how I would have navigated Hollywood without her guidance and support." The words hit Richard and Monica like physical blows. I could see them struggling to reconcile this information with their long-held assumptions about my life and capabilities. The intervention they had planned to stage was becoming impossible to execute, when the person they intended to help was clearly thriving beyond their wildest imagination. My mother finally found her voice, approaching us with the careful steps of someone walking on unstable ground. "Natalie," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "we had no idea. Why didn't you tell us about any of this?" The question hung in the air, loaded with years of dismissal and criticism that had taught me to keep my successes and dreams hidden from family scrutiny. I looked at my mother's face, seeing genuine confusion, mixed with dawning realization of how badly they had misjudged me. "Because you never believed in me," I said simply. "Because every time I tried to share my dreams or ambitions, they were dismissed as unrealistic fantasies. Because I learned early that it was easier to keep my real life private than to constantly defend it against people who were determined to see me as a failure." The honesty of my response created another moment of uncomfortable silence. But before anyone could formulate a response, Zara stepped into the breach with the skilled diplomacy of someone accustomed to managing difficult conversations. "I understand why Natalie chose to keep our friendship private," she said, addressing the room at large. "The entertainment industry can be overwhelming, and maintaining genuine relationships requires careful boundaries. But I've reached a point in my career where I want to celebrate the people who have supported me, especially someone as brilliant and talented as Natalie." She turned to face my family directly, her expression serious but kind. "I know this must be a shock, but I want you all to understand something important. Natalie isn't my friend because I'm famous or successful. I'm successful partly because Natalie has been my friend. Her insights about storytelling, character development, and human nature have influenced some of the most important decisions of my career." Richard was clearly struggling to process this information, his face cycling through expressions that suggested his worldview was undergoing rapid and uncomfortable reconstruction. "But Natalie worked at a bookstore," he said finally, as if this fact somehow negated everything else we'd revealed. "She worked at a bookstore while developing expertise that major studios now pay handsomely to access," Zara corrected gently. "She's currently a senior literary consultant at Constellation Pictures, where she's revolutionizing how the industry approaches adaptation projects. Her salary alone is probably more than most people in this room make in a year." The specific mention of my professional success and financial compensation seemed to finally penetrate the fog of disbelief that had surrounded my family since our arrival. Monica's eyes widened as she processed the implications, while Richard's face went through a series of complex calculations that probably involved comparing his own income to what Zara had just revealed about mine. "Senior literary consultant," my mother repeated slowly as if testing the words to see if they made sense. "At a major studio. One of the best in the business," Zara confirmed. "Natalie has been instrumental in several of my recent project choices, including the role that won me the Golden Globe 3 weeks ago. When I thanked her during my acceptance speech, I meant every word." The mention of the Golden Globes triggered another wave of recognition among the family members who had watched the ceremony. I could see them remembering the moment when Zara had thanked me by name, finally understanding that the speech they had witnessed wasn't just polite acknowledgement but genuine recognition of my professional contributions. Isabel Rodriguez, Monica's friend who had always been particularly condescending toward me, finally found her voice. We saw the awards ceremony, she said carefully. But we thought we didn't understand that you were actually successful. I supplied, allowing a note of satisfaction to color my voice. Actually valued for my expertise. Actually living a life that extends beyond your ability to imagine it. The room fell silent again as the full weight of their misconceptions became impossible to ignore. For years they had constructed an elaborate narrative about my failures and limitations, using me as a cautionary tale and a source of self-congratulation about their own achievements. Now they were being forced to confront the possibility that they had been completely wrong about the relative value of our respective lives. Zara seemed to sense that the moment needed careful handling to avoid permanent damage to family relationships. I hope you can understand, she said, her voice gentle but firm, that Natalie's reluctance to share details about her life wasn't about deception or fantasy. It was about protecting herself from judgment and skepticism that she had experienced too many times before. Dylan stepped forward again, his face showing a mixture of pride and regret. "We failed you," he said to me directly. "I should have asked more questions, shown more interest in what you were actually doing instead of just accepting everyone else's assumptions." His honesty seemed to break something loose in the rest of the family. One by one, relatives began approaching us with expressions ranging from embarrassment to genuine excitement about my unexpected success. My Aunt Linda asked detailed questions about my work at Constellation Pictures. My cousin Beth wanted to know what it was like to attend the Golden Globes. Even some of the family members who had been most dismissive in the past seemed eager to re-establish connections that they had previously considered unimportant. But throughout the gradually warming social interactions, I noticed that Richard and Monica remained somewhat apart from the group, their expressions suggesting that they were still struggling to fully accept what they were witnessing. The intervention they had planned, the concerned conversations about my Hollywood delusions, the investigation into my supposed fantasies, all of it had been revealed as patronizing condescension directed at someone who was actually more successful than they were. As the afternoon progressed, Zara proved to be everything I could have hoped for in this situation. She was gracious with family members who approached her, patient with their questions about the entertainment industry, and consistently generous in her praise for my professional abilities and personal character. She told stories about our friendship that illuminated aspects of my personality that my family had never bothered to notice or appreciate. "Natalie has this incredible gift for understanding what makes stories universal," she told a group that had gathered around us near the dessert table. "She can read a script or a book and immediately identify the emotional core that will resonate with audiences. That's not a skill you can learn in school or develop through networking. It's pure intuition combined with deep empathy and years of reading everything she could get her hands on." My father Kevin, who had been uncharacteristically quiet since our arrival, finally approached me during a moment when Zara was taking photos with some of the younger family members. "Natalie," he said, his voice heavy with emotion I had rarely heard from him, "I owe you an apology. We all do. We were so focused on conventional measures of success that we completely missed what you were actually accomplishing." The apology was more than I had expected and perhaps more than I had even hoped for. But it also felt incomplete, like a bandage on a wound that had been years in the making. "I appreciate that, Dad," I said carefully. "But I need you to understand that this isn't just about missing my accomplishments. It's about consistently making me feel like my dreams and ambitions were worthless unless they fit your narrow definition of what success should look like." He nodded slowly, clearly still processing the magnitude of how wrong they had all been. "How do we fix this?" he asked. Before I could answer, Zara rejoined our conversation, having apparently finished her photo session with the younger generation. "Family relationships can heal," she said diplomatically. "But it takes genuine commitment to seeing each other clearly and honestly. Natalie has always been the same person she is today. The only thing that's changed is that her success has become impossible to ignore." The afternoon continued with a mixture of awkward realizations and tentative reconciliations. Family members who had dismissed my choices for years suddenly wanted to hear detailed accounts of my work and lifestyle. People who had treated me as an object of pity were now seeking selfies and asking if I could introduce them to other celebrities. The transformation was as dramatic as it was uncomfortable, highlighting just how conditional their respect and interest had always been. As the reunion began to wind down, Richard finally approached me for a private conversation. His expression was sober and somewhat defeated, suggesting that the afternoon had forced him to confront some uncomfortable truths about his own behavior and assumptions. "Natalie," he said quietly, "I need to apologize for more than just underestimating your success. I need to apologize for the intervention we had planned, for the investigation into your delusions, for years of treating you like you were broken instead of different." The admission was more honest than I had expected from my brother, who had built his identity around being right about everything and everyone. But it also felt like too little, too late. "Richard," I said, choosing my words carefully, "I accept your apology. But I need you to understand that rebuilding trust isn't going to happen overnight. You've spent years convincing me that my dreams were worthless and my judgment was flawed. It's going to take time to believe that you actually see me differently now." He nodded, his lawyer's training apparently helping him understand that actions would matter more than words in rebuilding our relationship. "What can I do?" he asked. "Start by treating me like someone whose opinions and choices you respect," I said. "Stop assuming that your definition of success is the only valid one. And maybe consider the possibility that you might learn something from me instead of constantly trying to fix me." As we prepared to leave the community center, the scene outside was even more chaotic than our arrival had been. Word of Zara's appearance had spread throughout the region, drawing fans, reporters, and curious onlookers who wanted to witness this unprecedented intersection of Hollywood glamour and small-town Oregon life. But as I walked through the crowd toward our waiting car, I felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with the external validation or the shock on my family's faces. For the first time in my adult life, I had stood in front of people who had consistently underestimated me, and shown them exactly who I really was. I had claimed my success, defended my choices, and refused to apologize for becoming someone they hadn't expected me to be. The intervention they had planned to stage had become a revelation none of them would ever forget. The black sheep loser they had pitied and dismissed was revealed as someone whose achievements dwarfed their own. And most importantly, I had finally learned to see myself through my own eyes instead of through their disappointment. As our car pulled away from the community center, leaving behind the chaos of cameras and crowds, I felt like I was driving toward a future that finally matched who I had always been inside. 6 months after the reunion that changed everything, I stood in the penthouse office of Constellation Pictures, looking out at the sprawling city of Los Angeles that had become my adopted home. The view from the 42nd floor encompassed everything from the Hollywood Hills to the Pacific Ocean, a panorama that still sometimes took my breath away despite the fact that I saw it every day. The office itself was a testament to how far I'd traveled from that tiny studio apartment above Mrs. Chen's bakery. Floor-to-ceiling windows filled the space with natural light, while carefully curated artwork and comfortable seating areas created an environment that was both professional and welcoming. The bookshelves that lined one wall contained first editions and advance copies of novels I was considering for adaptation, along with scripts in various stages of development and awards that recognized my growing influence in the industry. But perhaps the most meaningful decoration was a framed photograph that sat on my desk, showing Zara and me at the Golden Globes, both of us laughing at something that had happened just outside the camera's view. It served as a daily reminder of the moment when I had finally claimed my place in the world without apology or explanation. My promotion to Executive Vice President of Literary Development had been announced 3 months earlier, making me one of the youngest people ever to hold such a position at a major studio. The promotion had come with a salary increase that was frankly obscene by Riverside standards, along with responsibilities that would have seemed impossible to imagine when I was shelving books and helping customers find their next great read. Now I oversaw a team of 12 literary consultants, managed relationships with publishers and literary agents worldwide, and had final approval authority on adaptation projects with budgets that sometimes exceeded the GDP of small countries. The success rate of projects I'd championed was unprecedented in the industry, and other studios had begun trying to poach me with offers that would have made my family's heads spin even faster than they already were. The morning brought my usual stack of manuscripts and proposals, but today also included something special: advance copies of the Riverside Chronicles, a memoir that Dylan had been working on for the past 4 months. He'd decided to document our family's story, focusing on the lessons learned about success, judgment, and the danger of underestimating people based on limited perspectives. The book deal he'd secured with a major publisher had been facilitated partly by my connections in the industry, but the quality of his writing and the universal appeal of his themes had made the sale inevitable. Early reviews were calling it a profound meditation on family dynamics and the courage to redefine success on your own terms. The irony that Dylan would become the family's first published author wasn't lost on any of us. My phone buzzed with a text from Zara, who was currently in Prague filming her latest project, a period drama that I'd helped her select from a novel by an emerging Czech author. Just wrapped the castle scene. The director says it's exactly what you predicted when you recommended this book. You're a genius, and I miss you terribly. Can't wait to get back to LA next week. Our friendship had only deepened since going public, though it had required some adjustment to navigate the increased media attention. Entertainment reporters were constantly looking for signs of tension or competition between us, unable to understand that genuine friendship could exist without drama or rivalry. We'd learned to ignore the speculation and focus on what had always mattered most, our shared love of storytelling and our mutual support through the challenges of our respective careers. The intercom on my desk chimed, and my assistant Marcus announced that Sarah Chen, the studio head, was asking to see me. These impromptu meetings had become more frequent as my influence within the company grew, and they usually meant that something interesting was developing. Sarah's office occupied the entire top floor of the building, with a conference table that could seat 20 people and walls covered with movie posters from the studio's most successful films. Several of those successes had originated from projects I'd championed, including 3 that had gone on to receive Academy Award nominations for Best Picture. Natalie, Sarah said, gesturing for me to take a seat across from her massive desk, I have a proposition that I think you're going to find very intriguing. She explained that Constellation Pictures was launching a new division focused entirely on developing content for emerging streaming platforms and international markets. The division would need someone to head up literary acquisitions and development, with full autonomy to build a team and establish creative direction. We want you to run it, she said simply. Your own division, your own budget, your own projects. You'd be reporting directly to me, with complete creative control over what gets developed and how. The offer was staggering in its scope and implications. At 33 years old, I would be running my own division at one of the most powerful studios in Hollywood, with resources and authority that most industry professionals could only dream of achieving. The salary and benefits package that accompanied the offer would place me firmly in the top tier of entertainment industry executives. But beyond the professional recognition and financial rewards, the position represented something even more significant: the complete transformation from family disappointment to industry leader, from someone whose dreams were dismissed as unrealistic to someone who was being entrusted with shaping the future of entertainment. I'll need some time to consider it, I said, though every instinct was screaming at me to accept immediately. Of course, Sarah replied, take whatever time you need, but I hope you'll seriously consider this, Natalie. You've already revolutionized how we approach literary adaptation. This would give you the platform to influence the entire industry. That evening, I called Zara to discuss the offer, finding her in her hotel room in Prague during a brief break between filming sessions. Her enthusiasm for the opportunity was immediate and infectious. This is exactly what you've been working toward, she said. You'll be in a position to champion stories that might never get told otherwise, to give opportunities to writers and filmmakers who deserve recognition. Think about all the books sitting on shelves right now, waiting for someone with your vision to see their potential. It's also terrifying, I admitted. The level of responsibility, the pressure to succeed, the visibility that comes with running your own division. Sometimes I still can't believe this is my life. You know what I told myself when I got my first big break? Zara asked. That the worst thing that could happen was failing and having to start over, which wouldn't be any worse than never trying at all. But you're not going to fail, Nat. You're going to be brilliant, just like you've been at everything else you've done. After our conversation ended, I found myself thinking about the journey that had brought me to this moment. Less than a year ago, I had been standing in the Willowbrook Community Center, absorbing cruel laughter and dismissive comments from people who were convinced that my life was a cautionary tale. Now I was being offered the opportunity to shape the direction of one of the most influential entertainment companies in the world. The next morning, I made a decision that felt both inevitable and revolutionary. I called Sarah Chen and accepted the position, effective immediately. The announcement would be made the following week, along with details about the new division's goals and initiatives. But before the news became public, I wanted to share it with the people who mattered most. I called Dylan first, knowing that he would understand the full significance of what this promotion represented. Vice President of your own division, he repeated slowly, as if testing the words to make sure they were real. Nat, do you realize that you're now probably the most powerful person our family has ever produced? And the most successful by any measure anyone could devise. The observation was accurate, but also somewhat sad, highlighting how thoroughly my family's previous assessments had missed the mark. But it also felt like a vindication that went beyond personal satisfaction. It proved that success could take forms that traditional measures failed to recognize, and that perseverance in the face of dismissal could lead to achievements that exceeded everyone's expectations. My call to my parents was more complex, involving conversations that touched on regret, pride, and the ongoing process of rebuilding relationships that had been damaged by years of misunderstanding. My mother cried when I told her about the promotion, though I suspected the tears contained multiple emotions that she was still working through. "I'm so proud of you," she said, her voice thick with feeling. "And so sorry that it took us so long to see what you were capable of achieving." My father's response was characteristically practical, asking detailed questions about my new responsibilities and the scope of my authority. But beneath his business-focused inquiries, I could hear genuine amazement at how far I'd traveled from the daughter he'd dismissed as directionless and unrealistic. Richard's reaction was perhaps the most telling. His congratulations were sincere, but tinged with the recognition that his younger sister had achieved a level of professional success that exceeded his own accomplishments as a senior partner at a prestigious law firm. The brother who had planned an intervention to address my Hollywood delusions was now asking for advice about breaking into entertainment law. "Do you think there might be opportunities for legal work with your new division?" he asked, his tone carefully casual in a way that didn't quite hide his hope. The request represented a complete reversal of our lifelong dynamic, but I found that I wasn't interested in savoring the irony. Instead, I promised to keep him in mind if legal expertise was needed, focusing on rebuilding our relationship rather than relitigating past wrongs. Monica's response was more complicated, involving what seemed to be genuine excitement mixed with thinly veiled attempts to leverage my success for her own benefit. She had already begun dropping my name in conversations with potential clients, and her social media profiles now prominently featured photos from the family reunion, where she posed with Zara and me. But perhaps the most meaningful response came from Mrs. Chen, who called me from Riverside after Dylan had shared the news. "I always knew you were special," she said in her gentle voice. "Not because of what you've achieved, but because of who you are. Success is wonderful, but kindness and integrity are more important. Don't let Hollywood change those things about you." Her words reminded me of something I'd been thinking about increasingly as my profile in the industry continued to rise. Success had brought recognition, financial security, and professional fulfillment beyond anything I'd imagined possible. But it had also revealed the conditional nature of many relationships and the way that power could complicate even genuine friendships. The challenge now was to remain grounded in the values and perspectives that had made me successful in the first place, while navigating a world where people's interest in me was often motivated by what they thought I could do for their careers rather than who I was as a person. The announcement of my promotion made industry headlines, with Variety calling it a meteoric rise that reflects the changing landscape of entertainment development. The article traced my journey from literary consultant to industry powerhouse, describing my success rate with adaptation projects and my reputation for identifying promising source material that other executives had overlooked. But the media attention also brought renewed interest in my background and my relationship with Zara, with several publications running retrospective pieces about our friendship and its influence on both our careers. A feature in The Hollywood Reporter described me as the power behind the throne for several of Zara's most acclaimed performances, while Entertainment Weekly called our partnership one of the most successful creative collaborations in modern entertainment. The attention was gratifying, but also overwhelming at times. I found myself being invited to industry events, award ceremonies, and charity galas, where my presence was sought not just for my professional expertise but for the celebrity connection that had made me a recognizable figure in entertainment circles. Some of these events were genuinely meaningful, particularly those that focused on supporting emerging writers and filmmakers. I'd established a mentorship program through my new division, working with young professionals who reminded me of myself just a year earlier, talented and ambitious but struggling to gain recognition in an industry that often rewarded connections over ability. But other aspects of my elevated profile felt hollow and performative, reminding me why Zara had been so protective of her privacy for so many years. There was a difference between being valued for your expertise and being valued as a social accessory, and learning to distinguish between the two had become an essential survival skill. 3 months into my new role, I received an unexpected phone call that brought everything full circle. Tom from the Riverside bookstore was on the line, his voice warm with familiar affection. "Nat," he said, "I have a favor to ask. We're hosting a literary festival this summer, and I was wondering if you might consider being our keynote speaker. I know you're incredibly busy now, but it would mean the world to our community." The request touched something deep in my heart. Riverside had been the place where I'd first learned to love books and stories, where I'd developed the skills that had eventually led to my current success. The idea of returning as a keynote speaker, sharing my journey with people who were still discovering their own relationships with literature, felt like an opportunity to give back to the community that had nurtured my early passion for storytelling. "I'd be honored," I said, without hesitation. The literary festival took place on a perfect June weekend, with author readings, panel discussions, and book signings spread throughout downtown Riverside. The same streets where I'd once felt trapped and overlooked were now buzzing with excitement about literature and the power of stories to transform lives. My keynote address was scheduled for Saturday evening in the community center, where the disastrous family reunion had taken place just 18 months earlier. As I stood at the podium looking out at an audience of readers, writers, and book lovers, I felt the profound satisfaction of having traveled a complete circle while becoming an entirely different person. 18 months ago, I stood in this same room, feeling like a failure because my life didn't match other people's definitions of success. Tonight I'm here to tell you that those definitions were wrong, but more importantly, that the power to define success for yourself is the most valuable thing you can possess. I spoke about the importance of pursuing work that utilized your natural abilities, even when that work wasn't immediately recognized or rewarded by others. I talked about the value of genuine friendships and the danger of hiding your talents to avoid judgment. And I shared the lesson that had taken me 32 years to learn, that other people's limited vision doesn't have to limit your possibilities. The response was overwhelmingly positive, with audience members approaching me afterward to share their own stories of pursuing unconventional paths and overcoming family skepticism. Several young people told me that my speech had given them courage to pursue their dreams, despite pressure to choose more conventional careers. But perhaps the most meaningful moment came when a teenage girl approached me with a worn copy of a novel I'd recommended to her through the bookstore's social media page. "You probably don't remember," she said, shyly, "but you suggested this book to me when I posted about feeling lost and unsure about my future. It changed my life, and I wanted to thank you." The interaction reminded me that success wasn't just about personal achievement or industry recognition. It was also about using your abilities to make positive differences in other people's lives, no matter how small those differences might seem. As the festival weekend concluded, I found myself walking through downtown Riverside, with a sense of peace I'd never experienced before. The town looked exactly the same as it had when I'd left, but my relationship with it had been completely transformed. Instead of a place that had failed to recognize my potential, it was now the foundation upon which I'd built a life that exceeded my wildest dreams. Zara joined me for the final day of the festival, flying in from Los Angeles to support my keynote appearance and to see the place where our friendship had begun. We spent Sunday afternoon walking through the neighborhoods where we'd played as children, reminiscing about the stories we'd created and the dreams we'd shared long before either of us understood where those dreams might lead. "You know what I love most about this?" she said, as we sat on the steps of my old elementary school. "It's not just that you proved everyone wrong, although that's deeply satisfying. It's that you found a way to turn your expertise into something that matters, something that makes the world a little bit better." She was right. The success I'd achieved went beyond vindication or recognition. It was about using the skills I'd always possessed to create opportunities for other people, to champion stories that deserve to be told, and to build bridges between the literary world I'd always loved and the entertainment industry that had the power to bring those stories to massive audiences. As we prepared to return to Los Angeles, I realized that the journey from family disappointment to industry leader was complete, but the more important journey was just beginning. I had the platform, the resources, and the experience necessary to make a lasting impact on the stories that would be told, and the voices that would be heard. The girl who had once hidden her dreams to avoid family judgment had become a woman who was in a position to make other people's dreams come true. And that transformation, more than any promotion or recognition, felt like the definition of true success. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.